I'll introduce our first speaker. This is Elena Sánchez Nogales from the National Library of Spain. Her title is Finding New Environments for Cooperation with Digital Research and New Values for Heritage Collections, Experiences at the National Library of Spain.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. This is a difficult time of the program, just after lunch, but I will try to. Okay. Thank you, organizers. It's been a very, very interesting conference. Oh yes, isn't it working?
It's not doing anything.
Oh,
it's
okay.
just streaming.
Okay, I'll try. Okay. Okay, so this is the National Library of Spain. It's more than 300 years of history and more than 34 million items in its collections. And supporting research and the academy has always been part of its core missions, facilitating access to collections, providing tools for the generation of new knowledge, creating channels of dialogue, networks with research centers and communities. They have been always set as essential objectives for the institution. But, for example, in 2016, the library even created a scientific committee as an advisory board or body to reinforce and support these objectives. Of course, massive digitization of collections changed many aspects and processes within the library, but it started only 11-12 years ago at the National Library of Spain. But new collections were also born from web archiving and digital-born resources. And derived from this, as I said, many things changed at the library, from access and strategy, services, governance, many things. The deep impact of this process has led to an intense reflection on the library's role, its missions, lines of actions, and also how National Library does and should indeed interact with the different ecosystems around, of course, academic as well. Over the last few years, this has meant different forms of cooperation, networking with universities, academic groups, researchers, and these are only some of the active cooperation programs or projects. Thanks to this cooperation, directly from this cooperation, for example, we started with the Semantic Catalog project that led to our datos.bne.es. For example, we also managed to design and build a device to digitize pianola rolls, for example, directly working with an university group, or also worked through semi-automated transcription of manuscripts within the READ project that led to very nice outputs, for example, such as the attribution of one comedy to Lope de Vega. He was one of our greatest Golden Age theater authors. The work was previously attributed to a different author. So combining with these new technologies, for example, this was done. This digital road saw a very important milestone in 2015 when it was understood that not only should we cooperate or provide content in this new scenario, but also we had to play an active role in promoting the use and reuse of the library's catalogs, data, digital collections, actively facilitate the creation of new knowledge from our data and collections. And this was as such included in 2015 5-year plan and led to a 5-year project that is BNE Lab that we are still working on. The scope of this project is quite broad, focused. Rather than on technological prototyping, our main objective is finding new target sectors and environments where the heritage preserved at the library may be made and should be made present, accessible, useful. And this means, of course, digital research, but also schools, general public, even specific sectors such as gastronomy or tourism, for example. And the project was divided into different lines of action, but a very important part is data, working with our data. as a true infrastructure and in any digital project. And of course in digital humanities. We've had for years now converted our catalog into linked data and created datos.bne.es. But we have worked over the last few months, to create new open reusable datasets from all the information produced at the library, which is a lot. Not only bibliographic records or catalogs, but also authorities, national bibliography, statistics, directories, special collections. All of them have been analyzed, segmented into accessible, smaller, manageable, usable sets, mapped and converted into JSON, CSV, ODS, and other open formats. And they have been made searchable, accessible, and downloadable from our lab, and also from other official open data platforms such as datos.gov or the European Data Portal. From there, we have this has been done in cooperation with data scientists in Spain. 2 or 3 very active collaborators with the National Library have helped us develop this work. And from them, we have started the last few months to visualize some results, what can be done with those data sets, experimenting with different tools for treatment, analysis, visualization of these data sets. And this process has been very interesting in different ways, with very unexpected outputs at the library, I would say. Because when doing this conversion work we started a few months ago, our colleagues were inevitably wondering, but why should we create new data sets? We have our wonderful catalogs. What do people need? Everything is there, and it's wonderful, and it's we work on that very hard. But so internally, one output of this work internally is that through different sessions with our colleagues, it was clear that these data sets and new formats were very useful for their work, actually. So with using these powerful tools such as OpenRefine, for example, or R, they could treat and analyze huge amounts of data in catalogs and doing retrospective changes or things like that. And even they progressively are integrating those tools and these new formats in their work, the cataloging work and study. And secondly, we were all in those sessions confronted with questions posed by our collaborating researchers. For example, one of those researchers, digital researchers, asked this: I need to extract data from your catalogs and have only Spanish theater writers from the 19th century, especially women, for example. Another question was, for example, how can I extract only Spanish cinema directors? Well, with our description standards and our catalogs, it was impossible to answer those apparently simple questions. So it is fascinating how this process, initially understood as instrumental to serve our users in a different way, has become a starting point for a deep reflection on how we produce our data and the problems that a digital researcher finds when trying to make a real use of our catalogs. And of course, this is very stimulating process, and we encourage your communities as researchers to make any suggestion and help libraries to work to improve the way we try to meet your needs. The lab project, as I said, includes other lines of actions apart from data, and some others, for example, are, I will only mention, creating EPUBs, and that generates new data sets of clean reusable texts and can be used as potential corpora. We have hundreds already converted, and we'll continue on that. We also offer tools for interactive enrichment of works from our digital collections. And in fact, one of the outcomes will be presented later. And very recently, the library launched its crowdsourcing project. It's Comunidad BNE, BNE community. The essential focus here is, of course, public participation and engagement, but again, this is also a data project. We explore our catalogs, study how our collections can be enriched by general public, by researchers, and the aim, the final objective, is integrating the new information in our catalogs. So, collaborators can georeference, identify elements of images, people, for example, tagging images. And we are still working on new features in the platform. It's built on an open source base code, PyBosa, from where new features have been added and adapted. And the important thing here is that we have integrated, here you see it, we have integrated our catalogs. So when someone is writing an input, it is querying our database, our semantic catalog. So the validation is better and easier. So some projects were initially, this was presented in February, and 7 projects were initially suggested, and another one was launched in March the 8th to identify and describe women translators in our catalog records. This is it, with very positive results. We have very motivated groups collaborating here. And the idea here, for now, the projects are open, but we can and we will work on restricted projects only for specialized contribution that requires specific skills, or for academic groups willing to use this as a tool within their programs. And several groups have shown interest in this, so we will work on that. Future projects, over the next year, we will work on different projects, and one very important project is a future virtual environment for research that would enable private and collaborative work on data and digital collections, offer tools for searching, analyzing, treat, visualize data, tools for transcription, annotation, tagging, preservation of the results, etc. We will work on this idea over the next year and hope it becomes a useful work environment for digital researchers using our collections. We would love also to have physical space. We completely agree with the idea and the vision shown by the National Library of France, and we hope we will have that also in the future. But for all this, it is very clear that we need to be very close to researchers, listen to their needs, but also that has to be, we also have to be pragmatic and aware that this is public investment and not usually being able to count on high budgets. So this is why creating community, being perceived as a real partner for digital research is at this point and in the near future essential for the National Library of Spain. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Anyone?
Okay. Well, I'll be around.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Find our next presentation. Okay. Great. We have a large group. The title of the paper is Growing an International Cultural Heritage Labs Community. And lots of collaborators here. So please, yeah. Perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So yes, I would like to say I've got the honour of presenting on behalf of a whole community, and the authors listed here are not the whole community as well. So we've got Elena Dobreva-McPherson from UCL in Qatar, and we've got Megan Ferriter also in here, and Kirsty Lindstadt as well. So we're a part of a huge community. So I've come to tell you all about this growing international cultural heritage labs community. So obviously this is a lot about libraries, and it started out as building library labs. But from the beginning, from a survey which I'll tell you about in a little more detail, it was very clear that this is for cultural heritage as a whole. So libraries are an extremely important partner, but archives, museums, galleries, the whole cultural heritage spectrum was so important. And what is a lab? So we've heard already from several labs here today, but a lab is a space to experiment and innovate on site and online, so exactly what we were just hearing, with both digitized and born digital collections and data. Here is a list of all the various things that the different labs do. But one of the things so important about labs is both giving it a go, being okay with failing, getting up and trying again. And one of the things that came out from a survey that I will tell you about in a few moments, both the physical lab and the online lab were extremely important. So some of you probably will know Mahendra and his colleagues from the British Library, who have been running the British Library labs for over five years now. And as they were coming to the end of their Andrew Mellon funding, they were looking for sustainable options. So they reached out to the community and said, we're going to organise an event, who would like to come? And the first Building Library Labs event took place at the British Library in September 2018. Here you can find the blog post announcing the event, and the programme is already fully available online. As part of that, Nora McGregor from the British Library did some analysis. So she reached out to the people who wanted to attend the event, who did attend the event, or who wanted to attend the event but weren't able to do. And we had around 40 different respondents to this survey, and here is just some of them represented on there. We have made all the data available, so if you haven't already got access to the Building Library Labs community, the Google Doc is available there, and you can get access to the data. So there were 40 respondents to this initial survey. One of the other things that came out was there was so much collective expertise in the room, so it was important to gather all that and try to have these community notes as we were going along. So we created this document as a collaborative Google document, and that came up to 67 pages for the first event. And within 6 months after the first event, we had the second event held at the Royal Danish Library in Copenhagen. And again, we had the same format. Here's the blog post, and the programme is still online. And this time we had 61 pages of a collaborative document. So now we've got over 120 pages of all the collaborative notes and all the presentations from these two events. I don't know how many people know about Chatham House rules, but this is where it's within the four walls. You can sort of really say, well, things didn't go so well in a closed and safe environment, and that's how you can learn a lot more easily. So this was an important part of the event that was introduced in the second event. And of course, a community is all about the people. So it's on the YouTube channel, are some of the videos from the first event that have been also published online. So you can go back and have a look about what happened during the first event here. So we've had two large international events already, and it became clear that the community is so important. So we decided to set up a number of communication tools to help stimulate the community. Here you can see a number. So we started with the Google Docs, and as things have started to grow, we've started to migrate over to the wiki. So that's in the top right-hand corner, and that is kindly hosted us by the Free University of Berlin. We also have more day-to-day channels, so WhatsApp and Slack. At the moment, WhatsApp is the sort of more active community. And we have, if you want to just to sort of watch what's going on from the outside, we've got the JISC mailing list. And we keep up to date with various Zoom calls about every 2 months. And you can see us all sitting there. And I'd just point that was Christy from Australia was there at 2 o'clock in the morning, her time. So she's a really dedicated part of the labs community. So within, it's coming up to less than a year, but it's coming up to a year now. From the 40 institutions that initially responded to the survey, we've now got around 250 people in the labs community, over 60 institutions and in 30 countries. This is a really a great achievement, and it's wonderful to see how much interest there is in these cultural heritage labs. Milena is in the audience. 2 students and research associates from her, Somia and Fidelity, are working to transfer this information. So they're coming up, they're starting to populate the wiki, and also come up with a directory of labs around the world. So that is a work in progress, and all the information there can be found on the wiki. And it's not just the International Library Labs and Cultural Heritage Labs event. We've had several. So during the third Daria Beyond Europe workshop that we held at the National Library Australia in March, we had a special section on labs, and that was the kick-off moment for the Australasian Labs network. So in the next couple of months, they'll be organising an event in Melbourne to take this forward. Then Gustavo and the colleagues from Madrid, they had an event in Madrid. At the Royal Library of Belgium, we had as a pre-conference workshop to the DARTEC conference, the Digital Access to Textual Cultural Heritage. We had a whole day workshop on experimenting with Digital Research Lab. And maybe some of you already saw it on Twitter, the Austrian National Library formally launched their lab just a few weeks ago at the National Library there. And this is a truly global experience. So we've got the first regional labs happening and events happening in Africa. Firstly, in sub-Saharan Africa, we have at the Livingstone Museum a labs event being held in Zambia in August. And also in Cairo in Egypt, we've got another event being held, building and providing the benefits of a global digital cultural heritage labs community, being held in October in Cairo in Egypt. So we're having some amazing events, both international lab events, a lot of discussion in between, but what is the next step? So if we think we've got over 120 pages of collective expertise that have been brought together, we were thinking of having a book sprint about Glam Lab's Living Cookbook. So importance of keeping all this information up to date. So Milena and her colleagues have been working to find funding from Qatar, and we're very much hoping that we'll be able to hold the first book sprint in the 4th week of September in Doha. And one of the things about this is there'll be a read after sprint, so then the editing will all happen. This is done in a transnational way, so there'll be things happening in Doha, and then the other people will be editing the material where people sleep. So it's a really great concept. Just thinking ahead, British Library Labs, the regular annual symposium will take place on the 11th of November in the British Library, and Megan and her colleagues at the Library of Congress will be holding the 3rd International Labs event, which is now, the dates have been fixed for 4th to the 6th of May in Washington DC next year. The focus will be on collections as data and the interconnection with building library labs. So there'll be more news about that soon. So what do we want to do with building this international community? I think the important is to try and understand the landscape of digital GLAM labs around the world and able to build this global network. It's important that we work together in an open, honest and sharing way so we can all learn from each other's experience in a safe environment. And the idea is that we can make by learning from each other, that each of the GLAM labs that we make can be the best we ever can, and not importantly, not reinvent the wheel. So this is an invitation. If you're not already involved, please come and join us. Here is again the mailing list, or reach out to any of the people who are here in the room today, or contact either myself or Mahendra by email. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Sally. Would you like to ask a couple of questions?
It's the after lunch dip.
Then let's move on. Thank you so much. It's very inspiring. Yeah. Your microphone. So this is Adam, I imagine.
Yes.
Collaborating with Tamara.
Yes.
Keyword searchable digital library of Serbian historic newspapers, building the national infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this okay? Okay. So, today we will present you the process of building the national infrastructure that allows for keywords digital library of Serbian historical newspapers. And we have a lot of Metsalto files that we don't know what to do with. So we find out about BNL Viewer just to see how those files look like. And then through a small project of our Ministry of Culture and Media, we got the tool to make these files ourselves. And then we build our in-house system to search the files, to index the Metsalto text, etc., etc. And then other institutions from Serbia joins in. And now this year all major libraries in Serbia will join into this system. And then we're looking forward to next steps in the process of building the national infrastructure. So, what this infrastructure encompasses? It encompasses implementation of technical infrastructure, like servers, interfaces, technical infrastructure. And then now, once you have this technical infrastructure, basically you need to set up working processes. What does this mean? This means also empowering librarians, building new skills, allowing them to work within these processes that are created for them to build this infrastructure. And then drafting, and then making legal documents official. Making these two first parts of the infrastructure official. And then again, you see, it's not the end of the infrastructure building, but these are three major components that we are focusing on so far. So, keyword searchable digital library. It's Metsalto. I guess, is there anyone in the public who don't know what Metsalto is? No, everybody knows what's Metsalto. Great. So it's OCR, it's optical layer recognition, etc., etc. It's easy for you because you're advanced part of community. But believe me, in Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, searchable digital library is something really new. I just want to emphasize this because sometimes we're really not aware of this building gap within the community of people dealing with digital humanities, And I've been on a little tour through Balkans region last month, and when I said Met Salto, they're like, is this a sci-fi movie or what? So this is not very advanced, but it's, in my opinion, very important for this other part of the community that is not as advanced as you are here in this room present today. Okay, so how does this keyword searchable digital library looks like? It looks like this at this moment. It's a process, as I explained. It will be changing in the future. But basically, we try to make it as simple as possible, like Google. One field, you type in the word, and the researchers love it. They love it because it's simple. There is no metadata around to cloud their vision. They just want to focus on one or several keywords and get their results, and they really love it. And then you obviously present the results, and it's highlighted. So it's really easy and simple to use, and it really, I mean, they love it because it's simple, but researchers also love it because it really helps them. I mean, as I said, you're all very advanced here, but comparing this with going to a library or archive and browsing through thousands of pages of printed material or digitized pictures, this is a huge advancement for them. So, trying to generalize a bit, if what we give them really advances their possibility to do their research, then we're good. So what's the subject matter of this national infrastructure? It's basically historic newspapers. We do, of course, all other kinds of library materials, books, monographs, etc. But basically historic newspapers. So you can recognize some of the more historically looking newspapers here, but we also try to put as much of more contemporary materials as possible, because of course researchers of recent history are also one of the important user groups that we try to establish relations with. So, to summarize a bit, we do implement technical infrastructure, which is challenging in a way, because you need to set up a server and you need to set up all kinds of other things, and then you're an institution that does not have such a good ICT support, so you have all kinds of major issues there. And then once you have the infrastructure, you have to define working processes. You have to train librarians, you have to put them up to this technical infrastructure. And then once they're up to it, they ask for more, like, okay, we now know what to do, give us this and that. So it's a two-way process. But when you have a bit of this two-way process, you want to make it official. You want to draft and make legal documents official, which affects both sides of this two-way process. Okay, so legal documents. What legal documents have we drafted and made official so far? We have a national framework for digitization of periodicals in Republic of Serbia. It's a document that has been signed by major libraries in Serbia and Ministry of Culture and Media in 2018, last year. And this document is important because it establishes Met Salto as recommended format. Recommended. You cannot order anyone to do Met Salto, but you can recommend. For digitizing newspapers and other periodicals. And this year, so far, we have drafted documents that will allow for a wider implementation of this national framework, and we hope they will become official this year, but it's a process, you never know. It goes on and on. So maybe this year, we hope for this year. Okay. So a bit about these legal documents. Why these legal documents? Isn't it sufficient for library director to say, well, this Metsalto is really nice, I like it very much, why don't we do it in Metsalto? Because it's expensive, it's a bit expensive thing for institution in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. So in fact, librarians need some kind of alibi to spend all those money on Metsalto. When I said spend all those money, I think spend all those working hours of their employees doing this process. And then, of course, it's important to promote the concept of searchable approach to digitize cultural heritage for DH scholars and other interested parties. Because, I mean, that's obvious thing. Why don't do it in searchable? Why browse through paper or digitized pictures? Well, it's not that obvious when you have to explain why did you invest so many working hours in this and get just 10,000 searchable pages. When some other guy can say, well, I digitized 100,000 pages, but they're pictures. But we don't say that, we just say 10,000, 100,000. So you need to promote this idea that search is very advanced and useful for our researchers. And then a bit of an alibi for directly financing of these activities, because also when you spend money on buying licenses or doing this or that, you also need to say, okay, we're doing this because community asks for it, and this is in this legal document. So a lot of reasons to do, a lot more reasons to do legal documents. Okay, all those reasons. And in the end, you have all kind of context and collaborations within this within this framework. You have general public and various stakeholders in media and PR, because if it's a library thing somewhere hidden, sooner or later somebody will ask you why all that money, why all that effort is just for a few historians. So we really need to make, to try to make an effort to integrate more users from general public into using this national infrastructure. And then you have all kind of copyright issue, publishers, authors. We are a bit running out of time, so I won't get into copyright issues, matters that we now have in Serbia, but they are very serious at the moment. So this copyright issue is not something to be taken lightly. And then, of course, you have private companies that supply software, that supply hardware. You also have other cultural institutions that are not involved directly with this national infrastructure, but would like to be involved or wouldn't like to be involved. Say, no, this is not for us, etc. And then you have NGOs and all other kind of, as you see again, 3 dots, because digital technologies always open up the field, and this field of research is really opened up by this creation of national infrastructure that allows for one central point of access to materials. So I think I'm 12 minutes out, and now it's question and answer time. If you have any questions at the moment, so you can shoot.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
I want to know how much engagement you have from in universities in Serbia with students. Are they expecting that things will be available, digital collections will be available and searchable and usable, or is that not so much the case?
Well, that's the process, because they at first they really didn't know this exists. And when a first group of larger group through Twitter found out about this library, they were like all excited, but because materials were there. Yeah. And they at first didn't even look at the search option. But you have to build your audience, like you have to let them know that they can type in the word, but really it goes fast. So now when we say we will digitize this newspaper, they're like, will it be searchable? Yeah. So it's a process.
Other questions? Yes.
Thanks, Adam. If you could have had some support from the international community to help you with this process, the advocacy and everything, what would you have liked to have seen?
Wow, all kinds of things. We need support in any field. Basically, yes, the most valuable would be support for this principle, like we really do, to put from library world and
The manifesto.
yeah, like
Metsalto manifesto.
like because you obviously do have such libraries worldwide, but somehow they're not that exposed as maybe some other tools in the age world.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Maybe that's a PDF.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I think this will work.
So it should, yeah. Don't know what kind of reader it is. There we
Yeah.
go. Okay, good, thanks.
So this is Martin Wynne talking about the role of CLARIN and linguistic annotation in the digital transformation in research. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to come here. It's very pleased to be here in front of a slightly different audience to what I'm used to speaking to. I work in the Bodleian libraries at the University of Oxford, although I've only been there for a couple of years, and my background's actually in linguistics and teaching and doing research, particularly in corpus linguistics. So I've come into the kind of library archives sector from that route rather than being initially an archivist. And I'm still a member of the linguistics faculty in Oxford and occasionally do some teaching and research. And I'm also the national coordinator for CLARIN in the UK. So the Oxford Text Archive has been going for 43 years and has recently moved to the Bodleian Libraries. It was previously in the computing service at the University of Oxford, where it now it's a much more natural home for it in the library, where it now sits alongside a lot of other digital projects which are going on in Oxford. The Oxford Text Archive includes lots of language corpora, various types of outputs of digital projects, but also the bulk of the collection is a large collection of historical digital texts, so the full text of digitized books, including the outputs from the early English books online, 18th century collections online, and Evans' early American imprints. So some fairly significant and important collections of historical printed English books. As I've said, we're part of CLARIN. We're one of the repositories that were one of the founders of CLARIN. It originally started as a network of repositories and has become what Leon described this morning, so I won't go over these points again. The important link to CLARIN here, though, is that CLARIN, as an archive, CLARIN gives us access to linguistic tools and a means to connect repositories. So I'm going to talk about why I think, in fact, I'll give you the short version of my talk now in case I run out of time, and in case people watching the video don't bother going to the end. The short version is, if you have a digital text collection like we have, then your users will benefit from linguistic annotation and putting the text in an online corpus linguistic interface. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of how and why we're doing this in Oxford. We're doing it with two data sets. There's the Electronic Enlightenment, which is another collection in Oxford, which is historical correspondence. So it's scholarly digital editions of correspondence. It started in the Voltaire Foundation in Oxford and started with the the complete correspondence of Voltaire, and has branched out into other Enlightenment thinkers in French and English and lots of other languages, and over a wider period. So it's a very large collection of letters, basically. The Oxford Text Archive I've already described to you. So with the Electronic Enlightenment, you can search for and find individual letters and read them online, download them if you want to. With the Oxford Text Archive, similarly, you can search, there's detailed metadata, and the end result is that you find a particular text and can download it in different various formats. So the two disparate collections with, so I'll just go back to that one, with different access arrangements, but the functionality is basically the same. You've got quite sophisticated search, but you end up with a text, whether it's a short letter or a whole book, and you can download that. The access arrangements are different. Electronic Enlightenment is behind a paywall, basically. Access is via an institutional subscription. Nearly everything that's in the Oxford Text Archive is open access. For some things you need to go via an institutional sign-on, but it's free. So there's different access arrangements, different sorts of collections, but similar functionality. And there's also a crossover between them in that some authors have their letters in the Electronic Enlightenment and their works in the Oxford Text Archive. So there are some users that use both collections. So what we're ultimately aiming for is ways to combine close reading, which is currently possible. You can get to the text, download them, print them out if you have to, and read them. At the moment, it's not so good at any of the big data approaches, the things that have been described this morning, that Emmanuel described quite well, how and Martin as well, how they're trying to facilitate distant reading and big data approaches, data and text mining. So we're looking at ways to do that. Just a further word on that about close reading and distant reading. I've got two quotes from one historian a famous historian, a British historian of the 18th century, who describes his methodology in the first quotation. Basically, that he's a traditional historian. He spent all his life in archives and libraries, reading everything, making sure he's familiar with everything. Interestingly, his technique for his books is pretty much a cut and paste thing. He just kind of finds interesting examples of the phenomena he's looking at and puts them in his books. After publishing his last book, in a diary entry in the London Review of Books, he said, "The sad truth is that much of what has taken me a lifetime to build up by painful accumulation can now be achieved by a moderately diligent student in the course of a morning." Sorry, I'm going to need props. I'm just going to get some water. So I just give these quotations of an example of the historical point we're at, where we're getting a change from more traditional methods to there's the potential or possibility, some very exciting new methods and of much wider access to primary materials. And we're interested in close reading and distant reading. We want people to still be able to do the first thing. We want people to still be able to access the whole text. We don't want people to ignore them, just look at the results of their data mining. We need users still to be able to access the full text, and we're thinking hard about how they actually read them when they get to them, because at the moment, reading long text on screens isn't necessarily very good from the user's point of view. But we also want to facilitate the distant reading. We want the moderately diligent student or next door neighbour to be able to do these searches as well. Okay. So what I want to talk about for the rest of my time is how we can make this possible, what we need to do. Sorry, the text is a bit small on this, but it's just an example of a letter. So you can get an idea of it's just a short letter by Voltaire. Zooming in a bit, that's the text from it. Just to give you some of our idea of some of the challenges here. For those of you that know French, those of you that know anything about 18th century French, will see that this is fairly typical, but it's different to modern French. So you've got words like est rather than être, verb to be. And various other kind of differences in spellings, in the spellings of inflections. And so this is typical of 18th century French. But it's the first point I want to make is it's different to modern French. So we want to make these new forms of research possible by offering better online search capabilities and better exploration of the text. But in order to search historical text, there's a particular problem. Users need to be able to find all the different inflected forms and variant spellings. So what we've been thinking about is how you make that possible, because just making this text available for somebody to search if they're interested in affection in history, they're not going to get all the hits that they expect to get, because they'll find that it's spelt differently in different periods, and not all of the users will know that. And even if they know that, they've got to be able to do a search for different spellings and different forms. Because the problem, it's not just differences between modern French and historical French. We've got collections that cover different periods, so there's different elements of historical change. There are words which have very many forms. I've counted now, still finding new ones, but at least 84 forms of the verb pouvoir in French in EE. So even if users are expert historical linguists, we don't want them to have to type in all 84 of those forms in order to get the results that they want. And you also get stylistic variations. Voltaire spells tolération in different ways in the same letter, and you're probably doing it deliberately. So there's lots of variation, and so effective search of historical texts needs to be able to account for this. And so the way we're addressing this is by adding layers of linguistic annotation. So this is the same text in the input format that we use for our search interface, which has one word per line with different fields, and it has the lemma, so the dictionary head word, a part of speech tag, so it's whether it's a determiner, proper noun, adjective, adverb, etc., and a modernised form of the word. And then we allow users to be able to search on these different ones. So if you're just looking for pouvoir, you can search for that and get all of the and in fact, here's one I made earlier. We've put it in an interface which allows the users to search by the lemma, by the part of speech, by the original form, or by the modernised form. So this is intended to get over a lot of the problems of working with inflected languages and with different historical varieties, and with the spelling variation that you get in texts. So a lot of you will be familiar with this sort of thing, and what I want to talk about briefly is the sort of thing that this can allow. So it's not just for retrieving words, and it's not just for linguists. We've been doing an experiment with looking at forms of rhetoric and electronic enlightenment. For example, hypothetical questions in texts. And so once you've got this level of, 30 seconds, yeah, this level of annotation, you can start to look for more sophisticated patterns and forms. I'll have to skip those examples. So there are lots of corpus linguistics interfaces out there which enable you to do complicated searches on different levels of annotation, and which will visualize the results in different ways. This was intended to be skipped through quickly, don't worry, you're not missing anything, including showing grammatical forms, showing collocations over time in some cases, allowing you to search in lots of different ways. What your texts need, I think, to go into these interfaces is your metadata to be searchable. You need some basic levels of annotation, such as part of speech tagging, lemmatization, modernization is often necessary. And these are not only useful in themselves, but can be the basis for further levels of annotation as well, for adding semantic tagging or named entity recognition. The advantages of that are listed on this slide, which I probably haven't got time to read out now. But I think these are basic requirements simply to help users with searching the text, but also as the basis for further method techniques for text and data mining applied to historical text collections. Very finally, if I can take a few more seconds, to say I never planned to go through this in detail with you, but what we're doing now in CLARIN is looking at the available tools for adding these layers of linguistic annotation across languages across Europe and the different historical language varieties that people are working on within Europe. We're looking at the workflows, and this is just an example of a workflow. Don't worry too much about the details. With the planned output of a resource guide from CLARIN on the different tools for doing things like tokenization, lemmatization, part-of-speech tagging for different languages, for different historical varieties. So I've been looking at doing 18th century French, but there are people who are working on all sorts of different varieties. We're planning to come together in a workshop, CLARIN workshop in September, and to produce a resource guide which will tell you more about how to use these tools. And then we're going to identify the problems with licensing, finding and using them, and try and address some of those problems and make it easier for more people with digital text collections to be able to add these levels of annotation to their texts. There's some of the links, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Any questions? Sally?
Well, thanks a lot, Martin. More comments. And I realise that the Oxford Text Archive isn't really a IIIF connection, but I just wondered, could IIIF play a role in that and the sort of annotation canvas? Could this annotation work be perhaps done on in IIIF?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, not at the moment, no. I mean, we're working mainly with text, but there are images for these texts. Even though we don't curate them, we have links from our text in the OTA to the images. There is some work underway trying to bring together the methods for addressing particular points within text, which is obviously what would be required in a way that's compatible with IIIF. I know some people are working on it. I reviewed a paper recently with someone describing the work, but there aren't shelf tools out there now. I think a priority at the moment is to fix some of these basic problems for text, because actually, if they're not accessible at persistent locations with clear licensing terms, then you can't really get started on addressing those more complicated problems. So we're not there yet, but it's definitely, if you look to the future, the next steps, that's definitely along the line there, because that it certainly it would certainly add to, it would be the next bit of functionality I think that users would want. Yeah, unless you know more than I do about possibilities.
It's something we're looking into, not for this kind of text, but for digitized newspapers. So we're looking at if it could be possible to include the OCR layer, for example, on top of that, and then so yeah.
Yeah,
it's been done in this area, but I just.
Yeah, I know they've done some work on the Deutsches Textarchiv, BBRV in Germany. Probably be good people to talk to about that, but we can talk more. Yeah.
Anyone And I think that brings us to a break. Thank you very much for